although we suppose that the idea of representing the territory on an object or on a flat surface dates back to the dawn of time. The truth is that there is hardly any evidence of how maps were made and what they consisted of in antiquity. In the olden days, particularly during the era of the Romans, it appears that map-making was characterized by a linear and nomadic approach. In other words, the maps didn't depict territories in their entirety, but rather outlined a journey or route. Later, in late antiquity and the high and full Middle Ages, what predominates in cartography is a conceptual representation, an idealization of the territory, arranged in an orderly T-shape with the city of God, the sacred city Jerusalem, often occupying the center. It was not until the late Middle Ages, at the beginning of the second millennium AD, that new models appeared. The so-called portolans and isolarios, which are already a clear precedent of modern cartography.
The starting point of modern cartography are those portolan and isolaria, but it is also found, to an extent that we cannot specify, in the Ptolemaic tradition, which had survived in Byzantium, and which had been rescued in the final centuries of the Middle Ages and the first years of the 16th century, leaving an imprint in the maps of this period and, above all, in the first printed editions of the Geography of Claudius Ptolemy. But it is already in the 16th century, in the middle of the Age of Discoveries, when cartography adopts the formulas of representation that will be consecrated in the following centuries, and this through works that are authentic milestones in the history of maps, milestones associated with names of cartographers like Gerardus Mercator or Abraham Ortelius, editor of the Theatre of the Universal Earth, considered the first modern atlas. For diverse circumstances, the Library of the University of Seville possesses a cartographic fund of first order, guarding in its shelves editions of books of maps and atlases in which all the phases in the development of the cartography are represented, from the 16th century until the 19th. In this documentary, we are going to refer only to one of these works, to the Major Atlas, also known as Blavian Geography, monumental work and key in the history of the modern cartography. The Major Atlas is the best-known work of the Dutch dynasty of cartographic printers, the Blaeu. The creator of this lineage, William Janson Blaeu, had previously produced a Theatrum Orbis Terrarum in 2 parts. His son, Jean Blaeu, would expand the Theatrum with additional volumes in subsequent editions, culminating in the well-known 12 under the title of Blavian Geography. These 12 extensive volumes were released from 1659 to 1672. Like the atlases that preceded it, it is an open work, as the editor himself declares in his prologue, when committing himself to edit the maps of those territories that had not yet been mapped, or on which someone with knowledge suggested some modification. It is Jean Blaeu who inserts at the beginning of the Volume 1, in its Spanish edition, the dedications, firstly to Philip IV and secondly to Don Gaspar de Bracamonte y Guzman, Count of Penarhanda, who had been legate plenipotentiary in the meeting of Munster for the peace agreements, and was at the time ambassador in the Diet of Germany for the election and coronation of the Caesar. Other volumes will be addressed to other dedicates. For example, the German volume is dedicated to Queen Mariana of Austria, mother of the still infant Charles II. We leave it to Blaeu himself to justify his work. This we read in his preface to the reader.
It seems to me, benevolent reader, that it does not come out of the purpose, the concept of those who called history the eyes of prudence, political and civil government, warning in passing that geography was the lantern, the living and luminous torch of it. The reason is evident, because no thing, whether great or small, can be done in the world without place, and places cannot possibly be known with distinction on earth if geography is lacking. And he continues, by means of these charts it is not necessary to go around the orb to see everything in our room. The untrodden mountains, patent we have them, and we register them without horror, misgivings, or labor. We cross without danger, and in a short space, the vast and tempestuous countryside of the sea, and without any bag or saddlebag we go around the world without changing our seat. Just by stretching out our eyes and using the insensible movement of the spirits, we put ourselves quickly from the east to the west, and from the septentrion to the meridian. At last, what greater delight or entertainment is considered than to find, drawn and describe the kingdoms, lordships, and states of so many monarchs, kings, princes, and dukes, so nicely painted seat, so specific the relation of cities, towns, and villages, to see the current that rivers carry, the capacity and place of the ports where the sinuses are formed, the promontories are lengthened, and the capes are sublimated, adding the quality of each of the regions, the narration of proceeding, and customs, rites, and ceremonies of so many nations.
Blaeu cites the geographers who preceded him, putting Ortelier and Mercator in the first place, and warns that although sometimes some maps have been corrected, when new information so advised, otherwise the charts of some authors have been respected, because,
however, it seemed to us a crime to depart from the authors. We give to each the honor that belongs to him. We leave intact the works of others, in what could be excused the change. That we did not do anything without serious cause and powerful foundations, we fled with remarkable attention and careful safeguards, the detestable thefts of the sweat of the learned and diligent, the brazen audacity with which, at little cost, try to show off the lazy and incapable of greater enterprise.
Blaeu finishes by requesting the dispatch of colored maps for territories that are either not yet charted or are insufficiently known.
If anyone in what we describe, therefore the charts we present, should look for his homeland, which this natural love for all is kindled with vehement and burning flame, and perhaps he does not find it, or sees that we walk short and less adjusted than he would like, let us affectionately beg him to send us the charts, observations, or descriptions of his own, and singular, if he has them, communicating this secret of his.
The first volume of the Major Atlas opens with a world map and a map of Europe signed by William Blaeu. In the upper part of the map of Europe are shown in miniatures plans of the most important cities of the continent, and in the lateral margins are represented the types of the different European peoples. In the 16th and 17th centuries cartography, it was common to add to maps annotations and images that related to the territory's history and geography. The cartographic works within Blaeu's atlas were meticulously colored by hand once they had exited the press. These maps are not only visually stunning, but they also showcase an exceptional understanding of the land and the remarkable ability of the mapmakers to depict it with such accuracy. The accompanying texts alongside the maps hold significant interest as well, as they depict various facets of life within each region. Often derived from historical records or accounts from travelers to which Blaeu was privy, these narratives frequently provided insights into the administrative divisions, natural environment, means of subsistence, historical background, and the traditions of the people living there. The volume dedicated to Great Britain incorporates texts from the Britannia of the antiquarian William Camden. That of Russia is based on the reports of the German geographer, mathematician, and librarian Adam Olearius, and the one that brings the maps of the Far East is the work of the Jesuit missionary Martino Martini, who refers thus to the kingdoms of the Far East.
Nobody will be able, if the ignorance is not great, very short the erudition and the news, to deny that Asia, from the beginning of the world was, and in our centuries is, the most noble of how many regions embraces the roundness of this terrestrial orb, the most illustrious part of those that compose the globe that they call world, because in it the supreme and omnipotent Maker placed that orchard of delights that they vulgarly called paradise.
Sometimes the texts do not manage to hide a perhaps excessive pride of the natives, as evidenced by the paragraph that attributes to the Netherlands the invention, among others, of the art of printing. The maps themselves are accompanied by a long list of elements already enshrined in the cartography of the modern age. Rarely are the windroses missing, or the cartouches containing the different scales that were used, and the sometimes highly historiated ones containing the titles of the maps, the names of their authors, and often also the names of the dedicators. The majority of maps are detailed and contain features that serve a dual function, both decorative and informative. The seas are inhabited by Poseidon and all sorts of more or less fantastic creatures. They are also crossed by ships, a constant motif that sometimes served to emphasize the maritime power of the kingdom or nation mapped. It happens very often that the ships were represented at the moment of releasing a volley, which was a reminder that in that 17th century the seas were not only a trade and discovery route, but also a battlefield. We see on the map of the Netherlands the deployment of the Dutch fleet. There is also an abundance of heraldic motifs, or the representation of specific episodes, or allusions to the mythical history of the different places. For example, in the map of Sardinia, a marine deity emerges from the waters carrying the staff with the scale. At the opposite end, another divinity, Ceres, holds the island's coat of arms, the cross of St. George with 4 Moorish heads, and rests on one foot, alluding to the name Ignusa given to her by the Greeks or Sandalides, recalling the shape of the island, that of a footprint or sandal.
And we find again Ceres as the main figure of the map of the region of La Beauce, in France. A scene in which 2 dragons pull a chariot, driven by a young man, Triptolemus, in whose hands the goddess Ceres, who carries the sickle with which the iconography usually represents her, puts the shot. The scene recreates the agricultural cycle and is accompanied by a phylactery with verses from Ovid's Metamorphosis. Dona feros cereris, latos que sparsa per agros frugiferas meses, alimentoc mitia reden. Dons I bear of Ceres, that scattered over the wide fields fruitful sowings and soft foods return.